Welcome to How It Works with Holger. In this video, I want to introduce the new FNC dataset and FNC Maps heat maps to How It Works with Holger. We haven't looked at those yet. Just to get it out there, a heat map is a graphical representation of data and values are displayed as colors. And in addition to maps, of course, these colors depend on how many points you have in a certain area. The more you have in a certain area, the redder it gets, for example, and the less, the greener it gets. So this is an example of a heat map showing the state of Florida with certain points being highlighted. The fictitious task that we're going to solve in this video is very simple. We're going to create a chart of all the lightning strikes in Florida in 1 hour. As said, it's fictitious. I created the data set using AI, so this is not actual data from the state of Florida. Also, I stored the data in a JSON file, which can be read very, very easily using the new FNC dataset. And why I got this idea, Florida is considered the lightning capital of the world. Actually, it's not really true. It's only the lightning capital of the 50 states of the US. It's actually in Venezuela, but still, if you go around, walk around here in Florida, everybody's going to tell you, well, yeah, we're the lightning capital of the world. So that's how I got that idea. Looking at this slide again, we have lots of lightning strikes around Miami, Orlando, Fort Myers, Tampa Bay. And up here, I think that's our capital of Tallahassee. But as I said, it's all just generated by random. Before we look at the implementation and the application itself, let's look at the data source that we have to deal with. This is a JSON file, and I'd like to explain it briefly because this is not a web topic that we're talking about. So in JSON files, we can store, as the name says, object, because it means JavaScript object notation, right? So in this case, we have an object that has the property ID, latitude, and longitude as a coordinate. So each and every object signifies one lightning strike. And it's not one lightning strike, it's many lightning strikes, which means we have an array, which is signified by this square bracket here, which ends at the end of the file. And the file is quite long. There's quite a lot of lightning strikes in here. Right here, this is a list or an array of all the lightning strikes. And the cool thing with FNC dataset is that you can map these to a T dataset-like component, which is the FNC dataset, which is derived of T dataset. Don't be confused because outside here we have an object. So this JSON file here is one object, right? And in this object, we have one property, and this property, once again, is the array of all the strikes. And believe it or not, this is very, very easy to do with FNC dataset. And this is usually how real web APIs return the data. That's why I picked this little bit more complex example than just picking an array of things. Usually you have an object which also includes the number of strikes that have been returned. So this gives you a little bit more flexibility and also shows you how comfortable you can configure the dataset. So without further ado, we created a VCL Windows application, and on the form, I simply dropped the TMS FNC Google Maps component. You have to pick the Google Maps component because, let me show you real quick. If we go to FNC Maps right here, this is the component that lets you pick any of the services. However, not all services support the heat map. So that means you have to pick one of the providers directly in its own component that supports heat maps. For example, in this case, if we filter by Google, we find here that we have in the TMS FNC Maps category, we find the TMS FNC Google Maps component. And that's the one that I picked here, dropped on the form, and aligned it to the client area of the form. I also renamed it to Map. And then the other new component, the TMS FNC Dataset. And this allows you to load any sort of data as a T dataset. And in this instance, I'm just going to show how you can load a JSON file. However, in addition to JSON, TMS FNC Core also offers support for CSV files, comma-separated files. Really, really great component, and it is very flexible, meaning you can link it to any of those data link components. So you drop the FNC dataset on the form, and each of them has a data link property if you want to make use of this. And then you also drop the FNC data link JSON component, which then can be configured for the particular JSON file that you want to load. And the same would be possible for comma-separated files. And I'm quite sure in the future TMS will bring more components of this sort for different file formats and other data. And then you can link your data set using the data link property to the JSON component. And the JSON component, what I did here is simply selected file name. I clicked on the ellipsis button. And this is the cool thing. This works at design time. You don't have to load it at runtime. So the data is actually stored inside of your application. You click open, and then you also have to tell the data link where the data is stored. So you pick the data root element, which is strikes, because the element right here inside of the JSON object is strikes, and that has to be an array, and each object inside of the array becomes a record. So if we look at the JSON data link, we set it up with the file name. You can also load this at runtime, so you do not have to load the data at design time. There's many options. You can also use streams, for example, to load data. So we also set the data root element, and also very, very cool, you can also use it to save changes. So this doesn't only work for reading data, it also works for writing data. And then when we go to the data set with the data link set to the JSON component, we can then, for example, simply flip it to active like any other data set. For example, a Fire Deck query is also a T-data set, or a client data set is also a data set. So you can treat this like any other data set you've been using before in your VCL applications. And the best thing is, of course, this data set, I'm not making use of it here, but it is, of course, compatible to a T-data source. So you can drop a T-data source on the form, like so, and then link the data source to the JSON dataset. That's possible. So this is a very, very easy way to load JSON or comma-separated values. But even better, I haven't shown you the best stuff yet, because you can right-click the dataset, go into the fields editor, and then simply say add all fields or add fields, and it's going to analyze the JSON file and look what fields are inside of the file, and it's also going to pick the right types. For example, latitude and longitude are going to be float fields, and ID is going to be an integer field. Even that is supported, so you can directly link it to your data source and then to a grid component, just like any other database query, for example. Okay. But this, what we're going to do here, we are going to iterate the dataset manually in code. So in order to show our heat map, we have to iterate all the records in the dataset. We have to create the data structure for FNC maps, an array of coordinates, and then create a heat map with those coordinates. Sounds way more complicated than it really is. First of all, you have to make sure that you start interacting with the map only when it has been initialized. The event is called onMapInitialized. And you see, I already implemented it. And in there, I'm going to call my procedure, which I called show strikes, show lightning strikes. And it is going to get a data set as a parameter. So if we go up here, I define a procedure, show strikes, and it gets a data set. I did that intentionally. I really want you to see that the TMS FNC dataset is a T-data set. It fully implements it because it's inherited from that component. So in there, you have only methods that you're used to. For example, you can flip the active property. You can iterate the whole data set until its end. You can move using next, previous, and of course, you would be able to call append, edit, post, just like any other T-data set. But here we're just going to open the data set. We're going to set the length of the array that is going to store all of our coordinates. Coordinates in TMS FNC Maps are called TMS FNC Maps coordinate record array. It means it's an array of records, and each of those records, I'm going to show you one of those elements in code completion. They have a longitude and a latitude. They also have elevation, timestamp, and all that kind of stuff. You can even link objects to it in data objects. If you want to learn more, I wrote a book about FNC maps with all the details about all those data structures. But here, obviously, we're just going to use latitude and longitude. But before we can do that, we need to set the elements, the number of elements of the array, to the length or to the number of records we have in the file. And guess what? FNC dataset supports record count. So we can simply set the length of the array to the record count. Of course, you have to make sure that your array doesn't contain millions of records in this case. But of course, we know that the number of coordinates is rather limited here. And then what we can do, we iterate the dataset and we assign, just like we're used to from other database operations, we assign to the longitude using field by name, the longitude field. We use sFloat. You can also use sinteger, sDateTime. With regards to datetime, the component does its best with regards to JSON files to parse dates according to the ISO standard. However, if that's not possible, you would have to do the parsing yourself using sString, for example. So here, longitude, latitude. Now we jump to the next record. We increase the counter, so we assign the next element in the array, and we do that until we have reached the end of the data set. And then we come to adding the heat map to this map right here. And what we do is we create the heat map using the addHeatMap method, and we simply pass the array with the coordinates as a parameter. And then we can configure the heat map because the heat map is being returned by reference using addHeatMap, and we have properties like gradient start color, mid color, end color, and those are the colors. Green if there is only very few lightning strikes in this case, and red if there's a lot of lightning strikes. We also have the possibility to add weight to different coordinates. I don't want to go over this. So the algorithm from Google supports a weight component if you want to make some points more weighted than others. But in this case, in this example, every point has the same kind of importance, and thus we won't use it here. And that's all it takes, because then we can also move our map. Let me show you without this command, because this is one of the great commands in TMS FNC Maps. Also, everything has to be wrapped in between begin update and end update. I call that on the map component. And make sure that you also wrap it in try finally, because if you don't reach the end update or don't call end update after calling begin update, you're not going to see any changes ever again. So with this one also commented out, we get the following functionality. There we go. The map is initialized and it uses the default position from the component, which is in New York. And if you zoom out now and scroll south, I wasn't good in geography. So here we go. And this is so here, if you zoom in, you see the different lightning strikes. And if we zoom out, we get the heat map depending on where the majority of the strikes are. But it's not a good user experience that you have to scroll manually. So what you can do is you can call map zoom to bounce with the coordinate array. And what that does, it zooms your map so that all of the coordinates inside of the array are being shown. It also adjusts the zoom level automatically. So with that, we can start it like this, and we immediately get the map in there. And we can, of course, make it bigger, smaller, whatever. And as always, all the great features of Google Maps are supported and can be configured. Right now, I didn't configure anything, so by default, everything's enabled. Zooming, we can do street view, we can switch between the different map kinds. Everything's supported. That is usually supported by TMS FNC Maps. One final remark. In order to do this, you need an API key that you have to request from Google because this is using the Google API. There's several videos how to get a Google API key, and I just recently did a video what kind of issues you might encounter, but that's not really an obstacle. That is just something you need to do once, and then you can successfully use the Google Maps API in your future projects. Thanks for your interest in how it works with Holger. Please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more. See you soon.